School bullies tried to trip a tomb guard, but what happened next shocked everyone. The sun was setting behind the tall, ancient walls of the military academy, casting a golden light over everything. It was a typical day at the academy, with students hurrying between classes, soldiers marching in formation, and the usual hum of everyday life. Among the many traditions of the academy, one stood out above the rest: the ceremonial guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier. This tomb, a symbol of the country's sacrifices, was always guarded by a chosen cadet who would march in front of it every day at the same time, maintaining perfect discipline. This guard was not just any student. He was one of the most disciplined cadets in the academy. His name was Jack, and he had dreamed of becoming a tomb guard ever since he was a little boy. For Jack, being chosen for this duty was not just an honor, it was the highest form of respect he could earn. He had spent countless hours learning the precise steps, the way to stand still without moving, and how to march in time with military precision. He was proud to serve the tomb, knowing the importance of his duty. Every day, without fail, Jack would put on his uniform, immaculate, pressed, and perfectly arranged. His boots shone like mirrors, and his posture was always straight. He was the picture of discipline and honor. As he marched in front of the tomb, his eyes never wavered. He could not afford to show any weakness, any sign of distraction. It was a moment that required complete focus, and Jack was determined to perform his duty flawlessly. But not everyone at the academy shared Jack's sense of duty and respect. There was a group of students, older cadets, who thought it would be funny to prank Jack. They were known for causing trouble and playing tricks on the younger cadets. They found Jack's strictness and his serious nature to be something to mock. They often laughed about how stiff and boring he was, thinking he was nothing more than a puppet following orders. One of the ringleaders of the group, Dave, had been watching Jack for weeks. He knew that Jack was always focused during his guard duty, walking the same route, never breaking his stride. Dave and his friends thought they could finally get a reaction from the perfect cadet. They knew that Jack took his job very seriously, and they believed that by embarrassing him, they would be able to break his cool exterior. On that particular afternoon, the group gathered in the shadows behind a row of trees near the tomb. Dave whispered to his friends, explaining the plan. "We'll just trip him when he comes by. He'll look ridiculous, and everyone will see that he's not as perfect as he thinks." The others nodded in agreement, some of them chuckling at the thought of Jack being humiliated in front of everyone. As the clock ticked closer to the time when Jack would appear, the bullies prepared themselves. They crouched down, hiding behind the bushes, eagerly waiting. They could hear Jack's footsteps in the distance, the rhythmic tapping of his boots echoing through the quiet grounds. It was almost time. Jack didn't know what was coming. As usual, he focused on his steps, keeping his eyes fixed ahead. He had done this march countless times, each time with the same dedication and seriousness. Today was no different. He didn't notice the group of students watching him from behind the trees. He didn't hear the whispers or the snickers. All he could hear was the sound of his boots hitting the pavement in perfect synchronization. When he reached the spot where the bullies were hiding, Dave saw the opportunity and sprang into action. He stepped forward and stuck his foot out, aiming to trip Jack as he passed. The others held their breath, waiting for the perfect moment to see Jack fall. It would be hilarious, they thought. Jack would finally be embarrassed, and maybe, just maybe, he would loosen up and laugh at himself. The academy needed a reminder that not everything had to be so serious, but Jack was different. He was focused on his duty, so much so that he didn't see the foot that was about to trip him. Yet in that instant, Jack's military training kicked in. Without missing a beat, he performed a quick, graceful sidestep, avoiding the trip entirely. His movements were precise, controlled, and flawless. It was as if he had anticipated the move, though there was no way he could have known. He simply kept walking, his posture never faltering, his eyes never leaving the tomb. The bullies stood there, stunned. They had expected Jack to trip and fall. They had imagined him looking foolish, humiliated in front of his fellow cadets. But instead, they saw a cadet who seemed unaffected by their prank, who moved with such precision that it was impossible to faze him. Jack didn't flinch, didn't react in any way. He didn't even give them a second glance. He just kept walking as if nothing had happened. For a moment, there was complete silence. The group of bullies couldn't believe what they had just seen. The joke had backfired in the most unexpected way. Dave, who had been so sure of himself, now stood with his foot still outstretched, realizing that not only had his prank failed, but Jack hadn't even broken his stride. Jack was not the easy target they had hoped for. Jack continued his march, his footsteps echoing through the academy, leaving the group of bullies in the dust. His composure was unshaken. The crowd that had gathered to watch the ceremony, students, faculty, and passers-by, watched in silence, some of them impressed by Jack's calmness and others curious about the awkwardness they had just witnessed. The bullies, meanwhile, exchanged confused looks. They had expected to see Jack stumble and fall. Instead, they had seen something much more powerful. A person who would not be distracted, who would not let anything or anyone interfere with their duty. In that moment, Jack wasn't just a tomb guard. He was a symbol of resilience, strength, and unwavering discipline. Though Jack didn't know it at the time, the way he handled that moment would change the way others saw him. And the bullies, who thought they could easily break him, were left to reconsider their actions. After Jack's unexpected sidestep, the silence that followed felt heavy. The group of bullies, still frozen in place, stood in shock as Jack continued his march, unbothered by their failed prank. Their plan had been so carefully thought out, yet it had crumbled in front of them. There was no way they could have predicted Jack's reaction. He had been so calm, so poised, it was as if nothing had even happened. As Jack continued his duties, the students and faculty who had been watching were still processing what they had just witnessed. Many had expected to see Jack trip, maybe even stumble a little, and then feel embarrassed in front of the crowd. After all, he was just a young cadet, and they figured he might be vulnerable to a little teasing. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, Jack showed something much more powerful: control, discipline, and unwavering focus. His professionalism left the crowd stunned. The bullies stood there, their faces a mix of confusion and embarrassment. They had been certain that their prank would work. After all, who would expect a serious, disciplined cadet to be able to react so quickly to something so unexpected? They had imagined Jack tripping and maybe even becoming flustered, but instead, they saw him sidestep with a kind of precision that was almost unreal. Dave, who had led the prank, stood with his foot still outstretched, his expression changing from mischief to disbelief. He had been so sure of himself, but now there was a feeling of dread creeping up his spine. The other bullies who had been watching eagerly now shifted uncomfortably. They were no longer sure of themselves. In fact, they were starting to realize something: they had underestimated Jack. They had thought that because he was a tomb guard, he was just following orders without question, but what they had just seen was much more than that. Jack wasn't just following orders, he was living by a code, and that code was stronger than any prank they could throw at him. As the bullies stood there, feeling awkward and defeated, Jack continued on with his duty. His movements were so steady, so consistent, that it almost seemed like time had slowed down. He didn't break his stride or show any signs of distraction. His eyes were focused straight ahead, his back straight, and his boots making the same rhythmic sound as he walked back and forth in front of the tomb. To him, this was just another day. To the bullies, it was a complete failure. The bullies were too proud to apologize, but they knew they had lost. There was no laughter, no triumphant moment. Just the uncomfortable silence hanging in the air, as the crowd began to disperse, realizing that there would be no dramatic fall or embarrassing moment to gossip about. The only thing that remained was Jack, the tomb guard, who was still walking with the same determined purpose as if nothing had happened. When the ceremony finally ended, Jack walked back to his post, still with the same calm composure. He hadn't been fazed, not one bit. It was as if the prank had never occurred. For Jack, it was just another day of doing his duty to the best of his ability. He was used to this kind of discipline. It was what he had trained for, what he had always believed in. There was no room for distraction, no room for error. Every step had to be perfect, and every action had to be deliberate. The tomb, and the people it represented, deserved nothing less. As Jack made his way back to his quarters, a few cadets who had been watching the whole thing approached him. They were younger, newer to the academy, and they had been fascinated by Jack's ability to handle the prank so smoothly. One of them, a boy named Kyle, spoke up hesitantly. "Jack, that was amazing. You didn't even flinch. How did you do that?" Jack glanced over at him, giving a small smile. He didn't speak for a moment, as if he was carefully choosing his words. Finally, he said, "It's not about not flinching. It's about staying focused. You can't let anything, no matter how small, break your concentration when you have a duty. I'm just doing my job. It's all about discipline. Kyle nodded, impressed. He had heard about Jack's reputation as the perfect cadet, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. It wasn't just about walking the same path every day. It was about how Jack carried himself, how he kept his mind sharp and his heart steady, no matter what happened around him. Kyle looked up to him, not just because of Jack's position, but because of the strength he showed, even in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, the bullies, still standing near the tomb, were beginning to regret their actions. Dave, who had been so confident before, was now unsure of himself. He had tried to break Jack, but instead, he had only seen a demonstration of how much stronger Jack was than he ever thought possible. The group of bullies, still silent, exchanged glances. They had failed, and the failure wasn't just about the prank. It was about their complete misunderstanding of who Jack was. They had thought he was just a cadet in a uniform, someone to be ridiculed, but they had missed the heart of who he really was. Jack was more than just a soldier. He was someone who lived by a code of honor and discipline that went beyond anything they could ever imagine. The next day, rumors about the prank and Jack's unshakable composure spread throughout the academy. The bullies tried to brush it off, but they couldn't deny the growing respect that was now directed at Jack. His ability to remain unfazed by their tricks only seemed to make him more impressive in the eyes of the other cadets. The prank, which had been meant to embarrass him, had instead made Jack a legend among his peers. He was no longer just the serious tomb guard. He was a symbol of strength and discipline, and everyone knew it. In the coming days, Jack's reputation continued to grow. It wasn't just about the way he marched in front of the tomb anymore. It was about the way he handled himself, the way he stayed true to his duty, no matter what. Even those who had once found his serious demeanor boring now admired his resilience and focus. It wasn't just his role as a tomb guard that earned him respect. It was the way he lived his life, with honor and integrity in every step he took. And for the bullies, things started to change. The more they thought about it, the more they realized how foolish they had been. They had tried to bring Jack down, but instead, they had elevated him in the eyes of everyone. What they had failed to see was that Jack wasn't just playing a part. He was living a principle, and principles weren't so easily shaken. The lesson was clear. If you try to break someone who lives by a code, all you'll do is prove how much stronger they are than you ever thought. In the days that followed the failed prank, something unusual began to happen at the academy. The students who had once seen Jack as just another cadet, someone who followed orders without question, started to look at him differently. He wasn't just a tomb guard anymore. He had become a symbol of something more. To some, he was a living example of the values they all should strive for: discipline, focus, and integrity. For others, Jack was now a figure of respect, someone who had shown strength in the face of adversity without ever losing his composure. The bullies, particularly Dave and his friends, had never expected this kind of outcome. They had thought their prank would weaken Jack's image, that they would make him seem less perfect in the eyes of others. Instead, they had unwittingly made him more impressive. The way Jack had calmly sidestepped their trick, without even breaking his stride, made him seem even more untouchable than before. And as the days passed, the whispers around the academy only grew stronger. Jack's name became synonymous with courage and resilience. At first, the bullies tried to laugh it off. They had been embarrassed, yes, but they didn't want to admit that their plan had completely backfired. They had hoped Jack would falter, perhaps lose his cool, or even trip and fall in front of everyone. But he hadn't. And they hated the way they had underestimated him. The more they thought about it, the more it stung. One afternoon, as Dave and his friends sat in the mess hall, they overheard a conversation that made them realize just how much Jack's reputation had grown. A group of younger cadets was sitting nearby, discussing the incident. One of them said, "I heard about what happened with Jack. He didn't even flinch when those guys tried to trip him. I can't believe how calm he was. I think that's the kind of person I want to be." The other cadets nodded in agreement. "Yeah, he didn't get upset or anything. He just kept walking like nothing happened. That's real strength. I admire that." Dave, who had been listening quietly, felt a wave of frustration rise within him. He had tried to embarrass Jack, to make him look weak, and now it felt like he had only made him stronger in everyone's eyes. Dave had always been the one who got attention. He was the one who cracked jokes, who pulled pranks, who was known for being the life of the party. But now it was Jack who had everyone's respect, and that made Dave feel small. It made him feel like he had failed. As the week went on, the bullies began to notice how the other cadets were treating Jack. They no longer mocked him behind his back or whispered jokes when he passed by. Instead, they stood a little straighter when he walked past, acknowledging him with nods or quiet words of respect. It was clear to everyone that Jack was different. He wasn't just a cadet following the rules. He was someone who embodied the very values the Academy held dear. Meanwhile, Jack remained the same. He didn't change his behavior, didn't act any differently. He didn't seek attention or try to prove anything. He simply went about his duties as a tomb guard, never letting anything distract him. But it was impossible not to notice the shift in how others viewed him. The younger cadets looked up to him now, and even some of the older ones who had once laughed at him began to treat him with a new kind of respect. One afternoon, after finishing his shift at the tomb, Jack was walking back to his quarters when he saw a familiar face. It was Kyle, the cadet who had spoken to him after the prank. Kyle approached him with a smile, looking a little nervous. "Jack," he said, "I just wanted to say I really admire how you handled everything. I've never seen anyone stay so calm in a situation like that. I mean, those guys were trying to mess with you and you didn't let it bother you. That's impressive." Jack gave him a small smile in return. "Thanks, Kyle. It wasn't anything, just doing my job." But Kyle shook his head. "No, seriously, you didn't even break a sweat. You made it look easy. It's not easy to stay so focused, especially when people are trying to get a reaction out of you." Jack paused for a moment, considering Kyle's words. "It's all about staying focused on what matters. I don't let distractions get to me, because the tomb and the duty I have mean more to me than anything else. If I let myself get upset by something small, I'm not doing my job properly." Kyle nodded, clearly impressed by Jack's wisdom. "You're right. I wish I could be more like that." Jack didn't say much more, but he could tell that his calmness had made an impact on Kyle. It wasn't about showing off or proving something to anyone. It was about living by the principles that Jack had always believed in. Kyle, like many others, was starting to realize that the strength Jack showed wasn't just physical. It was mental and emotional. It came from within, from a deep sense of purpose. Over the next few days, Jack continued to perform his duties as usual. The ceremony at the tomb became something of a ritual for many students, who would stop to watch him march with his usual precision and focus. Some would even stand in quiet admiration, not wanting to interrupt the solemnity of the moment. Jack's daily routine had become a source of inspiration for many, a reminder that strength wasn't always about loud displays or force. Sometimes, the strongest people were those who could stay calm and collected, no matter what the world threw at them. For the bullies, however, things were becoming more complicated. Dave, in particular, felt the weight of his actions. He had tried to break Jack, to make him seem like just another cadet who could be knocked down with a simple prank. But instead, Jack had proven that he was unbreakable. Dave couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret. He had thought that by humiliating Jack, he would somehow elevate himself. But now he realized that all he had done was make himself look small in comparison to the strength Jack had shown. One evening, as Dave sat alone in his room, reflecting on everything that had happened, he found himself wrestling with his own feelings. He had been the one to try to make Jack look weak, and now it felt like Jack had become something more than he could ever be. It wasn't just the prank, it was everything Jack stood for. Dave realized that he had been too focused on trying to bring someone else down, and in the process, he had lost sight of what really mattered. The next day, Dave made a decision. He found Jack after his shift and for the first time spoke to him with sincerity. "Jack," he said, his voice a little quieter than usual, "I just wanted to apologize for what happened before. I thought it would be funny, but I see now that I was wrong. You handled everything with a level of strength I didn't think was possible. I respect you for that." Jack looked at him, surprised by the apology but not shocked. He had known all along that Dave wasn't a bad person, just someone who had made a mistake. "Thank you, Dave," Jack said simply. "It's okay. Just remember, strength isn't about bringing others down, it's about lifting them up." Dave nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time, he truly understood the kind of person Jack was. And he knew, from that moment forward, he wanted to be better. As the days passed, Jack continued his duties at the tomb with the same unwavering dedication. His daily routine had become something almost sacred in the eyes of many students at the academy. What had started as a simple guard duty was now something much more significant. It was a symbol of discipline, strength, and honor. Jack's calm composure, even in the face of the prank, had earned him admiration from all corners of the academy. Meanwhile, the group of bullies who had tried to trip Jack found themselves facing an unexpected situation. They had hoped that humiliating Jack would make them look powerful, but instead, it had made them feel small. Dave, in particular, began to feel a growing sense of guilt and regret. He had thought that by breaking Jack, he could assert himself as someone to be feared. But Jack had shown him that true strength came not from trying to tear others down, but from maintaining one's integrity in the face of adversity. The changes in Dave were subtle but noticeable. He stopped hanging out with the group of bullies as much, choosing instead to spend his time reflecting on his actions. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how wrong he had been. His whole life, he had prided himself on being the one who could make others laugh at someone else's expense. But now, he understood that it wasn't about jokes or pranks. It was about respect. And Jack had earned that respect without saying a word. One afternoon, Dave made his way to the tomb after hearing that Jack was finishing his shift. He had something on his mind, something he had been thinking about for days. As Jack walked back to his quarters, Dave approached him, feeling the weight of his apology. "Hey, Jack," Dave called out, a little nervous. Jack turned to face him, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Hi, Dave," Jack replied, surprised to see him. "What's up?" Dave took a deep breath. This wasn't something he had ever done before, but he knew it was the right thing. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened before. The prank, I thought it would be funny, but I see now it was. You didn't deserve that." Jack looked at Dave for a moment and then he nodded. "It's okay, Dave. I know you didn't mean anything by it, but I appreciate the apology." There was a pause as the two cadets stood there, the words hanging in the air. Dave shifted awkwardly, not knowing exactly what to say next. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I thought you were just following orders, you know? I thought you were just some cadet doing what he was told, but I see now, it's more than that. You're doing something important. You're living by something bigger than just the rules." Jack smiled slightly. "I guess I am. It's not just about being a tomb guard. It's about being part of something greater, something that represents honor and sacrifice. It's about making sure that the people who gave their lives are remembered with dignity. That's why I do it, and it's why I stay focused." Dave nodded slowly, his mind processing Jack's words. He had never thought of the tomb guard duty like that. To him, it had always seemed like a job that Jack did with little excitement or fanfare. But now he understood that it was much more than that. It was a duty to something much larger than oneself. It was a symbol of respect for those who had given everything. "I get it now," Dave said, his voice sincere. "And I admire that. I've been wrong about a lot of things, and I'm sorry for the way I acted. I just thought I could mess with you, but I see now that you're not the one who needs to change. It's me." Jack didn't respond right away, but there was a soft understanding in his eyes. "It's not about changing who you are, Dave. It's about making better choices. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do after you realize you were wrong." Dave looked at Jack, a new sense of respect growing inside him. He had always thought of Jack as rigid and uptight, but now he saw him as someone who lived by his principles, someone who was human just like him. In a way, Jack had shown Dave a path forward. It wasn't about being perfect, but about striving to be better. And for the first time, Dave felt like he wanted to be better. "Thanks, Jack," Dave said quietly, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "I really mean it." Jack simply nodded, acknowledging the apology without needing anything more. He understood that change didn't always happen overnight, but this moment, this conversation, was the first step in a new direction for both of them. Over the next few days, Dave's behavior began to change. He stopped hanging around the group of troublemakers, and he started to spend more time on his own, reflecting on his actions and trying to improve. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was what mattered. As for Jack, his life went on as usual. He continued his guard duty with the same focus and discipline. But now, something had shifted in him too. He had earned the respect of his peers, not through force or intimidation, but through quiet strength and unwavering commitment. And that respect wasn't something he had sought out or expected. It was simply a byproduct of living his life the way he believed was right. Jack's story began to spread throughout the academy, and soon it became more than just a tale of one cadet's daily duty. It was a story of integrity, resilience, and the power of staying true to oneself. The other cadets, especially the younger ones, looked up to him as a model of what it meant to be a person of character. They admired the way Jack carried himself, and many of them began to take inspiration from his example. Even those who had once mocked him began to rethink their behavior. The lessons Jack had unknowingly taught them were far more powerful than any prank or joke. It wasn't about making fun of others. It was about lifting each other up, respecting one another, and doing the right thing even when no one was watching. And the bullies, who had once thought they could break Jack with a simple trick, now found themselves standing in awe of him. They had failed to break him, and in the process, they had learned something far more valuable than any victory. They had learned what it meant to truly respect someone. The transformation wasn't just in Dave, or in the bullies, or even in the younger cadets who looked up to Jack. It was in the whole academy. Jack had shown everyone that real strength wasn't about how loudly you could shout or how easily you could tear others down. True strength was about how gracefully you could rise above the noise and remain steady in your convictions. And so, Jack's story became more than just a moment of triumph over bullies. It became a symbol of the kind of person the Academy wanted to produce. Someone who embodied honor, discipline, and respect, not just for others, but for themselves. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere at the Academy began to shift. It wasn't just about the everyday routines anymore. Something deeper had taken root in the hearts of the cadets. The respect for Jack, the tomb guard, had grown beyond just admiration for his discipline. He had unknowingly become a symbol of something much larger: the power of integrity, the strength of focus, and the unshakable resolve to stay true to one's principles no matter the circumstances. And it wasn't just the younger cadets who were influenced by him. Even the older students who had once mocked him were beginning to see the value in the quiet strength Jack displayed every single day. One afternoon, as Jack finished his shift at the tomb, he was approached by a group of cadets, this time not to mock him, but to speak with him with genuine respect. Among them was Kyle, the young cadet who had first approached Jack after the prank. He had grown increasingly interested in Jack's way of life, and now as he stood in front of him, there was something new in his eyes, a sense of gratitude. "Jack," Kyle began, his voice filled with sincerity, "I just wanted to thank you again. I've been thinking a lot about everything you said, and I've realized something. It's not about how many people notice you or how loud you can be. It's about staying true to yourself. It's about sticking to what you believe in, no matter what others think." Jack smiled, nodding in understanding. "It's true. The world may try to distract you, but if you do know where you stand, you'll lose your way. But if you stay focused on what really matters, you'll always find your path." Kyle looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "I've started trying to live like that, not just with my duties, but in everything. I'm learning that it's not enough to just follow orders. You have to believe in what you're doing. I've realized that being a good cadet isn't about perfection. It's about honesty and doing your best, even when no one is watching." Jack placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "You're already on the right track, Kyle. It's not about being perfect. It's about making the right choices and staying true to yourself. And you'll see that's what will make you stand out." Kyle's eyes brightened and he stepped back slightly, his face filled with appreciation. "Thank you, Jack. You've really opened my eyes to a lot. I think I can do better now." As Kyle left, a few other cadets approached Jack, expressing similar feelings. It was clear that Jack's example was spreading throughout the academy. His calm, composed nature in the face of adversity had inspired something in others, a desire to be better, to live with purpose, and to respect the values that Jack had shown them. Meanwhile, Dave, the leader of the group of bullies, continued his transformation. It had been weeks since the prank, but the lessons he had learned were still fresh in his mind. He had started to change not just in how he interacted with Jack, but in how he carried himself overall. He began to take his duties more seriously, not because he wanted to be admired, but because he understood now that integrity mattered more than popularity. He wanted to be someone who earned respect through his actions, not through pranks or jokes. One day, after finishing a difficult training session, Dave found himself sitting alone outside, reflecting on everything that had happened. His thoughts drifted back to the prank, to the moment when he and his friends had tried to trip Jack. He had thought it would be funny, a way to show Jack he wasn't invincible. But the way Jack had handled it, without anger, without frustration, had left him in awe. It was in that moment that Dave realized something about himself. He had been trying to break Jack, but in the process, Jack had taught him something far more valuable. Jack had shown him that true strength was about staying calm, staying focused, and doing what was right even when it was hard. As Dave sat there lost in thought, he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Jack walking toward him. For a moment there was an awkward silence. Dave wasn't sure how to speak to him anymore. The prank seemed so childish now, so beneath them both, but Jack, as always, was calm and approachable. "Hey, Dave," Jack said, giving him a small nod. "How's it going?" Dave took a deep breath, deciding that now was the time to say what had been on his mind for so long. "Jack," he began, his voice steady but sincere, "I want to apologize for what happened before. I never should have tried to prank you like that. I thought it would be funny, but I see now that it was just childish. You handled it better than I ever could have. You didn't let it get to you, and I admire that." Jack listened quietly, nodding as Dave spoke. There was no need for words of comfort, no need to make Dave feel better. The apology, Jack understood, was a step in Dave's journey toward growth, and that was enough. "It's all right, Dave," Jack replied with a calm smile. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that you learned something from it. I respect that." Dave looked at Jack, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He didn't need to be the loudest or the most popular cadet. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. What mattered was how he treated others, how he lived his life with honor. And for that, Jack was an example he would always remember. As the weeks turned into months, Jack continued his duty at the tomb, never wavering in his commitment. But now, there was a different kind of respect in the air. It wasn't just the younger cadets who looked up to him. Even those who had once seen him as rigid or unapproachable now recognized his strength. They understood that Jack wasn't just another soldier following orders. He was a person who lived by a code, a person who didn't let the world's distractions pull him away from what he knew was right. And Jack, for his part, remained the same. He never sought attention, never looked for praise. He simply did what he believed in, quietly and without expectation. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about doing the best he could every single day for the people who depended on him, for the tomb that held the memories of those who had given their lives. In the end, Jack's story became one not just of triumph, but of transformation. It wasn't just the bullies who had changed. It was the entire academy. The students, inspired by Jack's example, began to live with a newfound sense of integrity and purpose. They realized that true strength wasn't about how loud you were or how many pranks you could pull off. It was about how you treated others, how you held yourself to a higher standard, and how you stayed true to what you believed in, no matter what. And as for Dave, he continued his journey, not as a bully, but as someone who had learned to respect the things that truly mattered. He knew he had a long way to go, but with the lessons he had learned from Jack, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Jack, the quiet, disciplined tomb guard, had changed him for good.